Welcome to Easy Peasy Stamping and Crafting first tutorial video. Today we'll be discussing Stampin Blends, which are our fabulous new alcohol-based markers. Now over the weekend I was coloring with my daughter and I was somewhat disappointed in my lack of results compared to hers. Then again, she's been coloring with Copics and for the last 5 years or so, and it's been about 30 years since I've had an art class. So we thought it'd be fun to do a technique video to help refresh our memory of art techniques and fundamentals to help us get the most of our new Stampin Blends.
Now, these videos aren't just for stampers or crafters, and this isn't just for Stampin Blends. A lot of the principles that I'll be talking about are universal and apply to all mediums of art. The first thing we're going to go over is color theory. Now, before we get too far in, we're going to discuss some key words and ideas that are important when talking about color theory, so that you can better understand what we're discussing when we're talking about the hue, or a color saturation. So first off, hue is pure color. Saturation describes the intensity of a hue. Think of it as highlighters versus a really pastel marker such as this. Highlighters have very intense colors, but they're not necessarily light or dark. It's just pure color. This marker has a low saturation, but it also has a low value. Value is the word we use to describe how light or dark a color is. When we say something has low value, we mean it is very light. When we say something has high value, we mean it is dark. This Night of Navy right here would be considered to have a high saturation as well as a high value. It's very dark, but it's not faded in color. It has a very rich, heavy tone to it. And this is important to keep in mind. You don't want to use too many colors that are all really heavy and contrasting. It's important to keep in mind saturation, hue, and value when you're pairing colors together, especially when you're pairing complementary colors together. These are colors that are opposite each other of the color wheel, such as yellow and violet, red and green, or blue and orange. And these colors make a very dramatic impact when you use them together. And so it's important to keep in mind the balance. You don't want the colors to be fighting each other. You can lower the hue and saturation of some colors in order to get more balance. Balancing lower saturations in order to make room for higher saturation colors. Such as, if you want to use this purple right here, if you take a look, it has a moderate value and a moderate saturation. It's fairly low in saturation. It's fairly faded in its color. Because of that, it would work pretty well with this yellow, and it doesn't distract too much from it. Another way you can put colors together is to use an analogous color scheme. These are colors that are next to each other or side by side on the color wheel, such as blue, green, and yellow, or red, orange, and yellow. And you can use 3 to 4 colors with this scheme. Next, I'm going to show you some examples of what I did when I was coloring in some stamps. And using the terms we just learned, we're going to discuss some of the aspects of this marker and how it came out. So if you look at here at Calypso Coral, there's a okay contrast between the values of the light marker versus the dark marker. But if you take a look at the other two, the Pink Pirouette and the Bermuda Bay, they're very close to having the same value and they already have the same hue. And so there just isn't enough contrast with just the light and dark versions of those colors. So what I did was on all of these, I took a third color and I used that to shade the darkest areas. What this does is adds more interest to it and more variety, and most importantly, more life. With the Calypso Coral, I used a red light cherry cobbler. This works well because red is present in both the orange and pink tones in this marker color. Because red makes it up, red is a nice color that works well together with it. With Pink Pirouette, I took a very different approach. Rather than using something that's close to the color family, I used a brown, a neutral color. Specifically, I used a neutral color that was also still fairly low saturation, because if I used something too dark or too stark, it would distract from the pale pink. With Bermuda Bay, I did something similar to the Calypso Coral. Because Bermuda Bay is a teal color, or rather a blue-green color, I used light Night of Navy, or a pure blue color, to do the darkest shadows. And the point is, you can use all sorts of colors to do your shading. You don't need to limit yourself to ones that you would think would work together. You'd be surprised at what works well. For example, when I was working with Daffodil Delight, on one of the petals, I used a purple color to shade it. And this doesn't look too out of place. It actually gives it a nice vibrant feel to it, almost exotic. With the Night of Navy, it was a bit more difficult because it was already so dark. But I found that you could still get some pretty interesting results using the darker reds and blues. And whether your color is cold, a green, a blue, or a purple, or whether it's hot, an orange, a red, or a yellow, it can give a different tone and feel to it. So a lot of this is just experimentation rather than just systematically choosing things. And so to experiment, I recommend taking a scratch piece of paper and then layering your colors in the order they go on. So if you're choosing a third shadow, you want to first put down your light and your dark of that one color. And the reason for this is because colors mix differently when they're layered on top of each other. Markers are similar to watercolor in the fact that they don't quite stand off purely alone. They tend to integrate and mix with whatever colors are also present because it is wet. And so as you can see, we have the pool party colors here. And so we can try using one of the Bermuda Bays. And it seems to work pretty okay. But you can also use other colors and just test out a wide variety. See, something like the Light Night of Navy might be a bit too dark to use. And you can keep going. And as you do this more, you'll get a better idea of what colors work well together, and you'll get a more natural feel and sense as to why. And so your homework for today, should you choose to accept it, is to play around with your Stampin' Blends and to practice finding colors that work well together, as well as finding a third shadow color or another color to use to shade besides just the light version and dark version of your markers. Now, if you want to try this with an actual stamp, I recommend using a stamp like this flower right here. If you look, there are lines which indicate where the shadows lie. It's not pure black, it's more like stippling. And stippling is when there are lots of dots or there's open area between the black, pure black ink. And this is used pretty often in comics and such. In this case, rather than stippling with dots, it's done with lines and strokes. And because there are lines and strokes, you can follow those and put the shadows where those lines and strokes are. I recommend not trying to attempt this with flowers or other stamps that don't have shadows there for you. In the next video, we'll be discussing light and shadow, but until then, I want you to focus on color and how it works together before you think about where that color goes. Thank you, and I hope you have enjoyed this.